Welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm Ann Marie Kerwin, America's editor, and today is our fourth in a series of podcasts talking with our partners on the WARC report, The Multiplier Effect. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the conversations with Analytic Partners, BERA.ai and System1, you can find those on WARC.com or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Just go back and look under the WARC Podcast for those episodes. So, marketers are constantly striving to contribute to growth. And as they've strived for that, a critical conversation has emerged around brand and performance. And these two essential functions have often been treated as separate entities, leading to missed opportunities and suboptimal results. A problem identified in the multiplier effect is that marketing organizations that silo their brand and performance teams are missing out on growth that they could be achieving by taking on an integrated approach. Joining us today to unpack this are two leading experts from Profit, a growth and transformation firm that advises CMOs. We have Kate Price, partner and head of marketing excellence, and Marissa Mulvihill, partner and head of brand building, both of whom have been instrumental in supporting the multiplier effect. Welcome, Kate.
Hi.
And
Thanks so much.
Marissa. Thanks so much for being here.
Really happy to meet you.
Yeah, it's great that you guys are here. You had so much to do with the multiplier effect, so I'm glad we're going to talk about it.
And we're last but not least, right?
Exactly. This is the fourth. This is the wrap up.
Very excited.
Yeah. Okay, so in the multiplier effect, we argue that you need to move from brand plus performance to brand times performance. And your brand and demand report from 2024 highlights that organizations that consistently outperform their competition connect brand and demand together. So talk to me about why this is so important for marketing leaders to understand this.
Before we begin, actually, just want to talk about how excited we are to be part of this multiplier effect report and how much fun it's been working with the whole industry crew.
Thank you.
Analytic Partners and BERA and System1 and you guys to kind of pull this thinking together.
It has been fun being the Avengers marketing effectiveness, hasn't it?
What a squad. I know, right? And then I just sort of want to say a little of like, thank goodness, right? Thank goodness that we're getting to this point that actually we're realizing that it's not 1 + 1, but 1 multiplied by 1. The multiplier effect is such a great name for it. And I think as marketers, I mean, I've been a marketer for a long time. And I think intuitively it has made sense to us, right? But over the last decade or so, the performance marketing part of the mix has become so technical and so complex that actually kind of the brand and the performance pieces have become more separated. The way I think about this, interestingly, and like, first of all, as we were talking earlier, I am not a sports person. So I'm going to make a sports analogy, but I'm not a sports person. I have sat on the side of soccer fields with teenagers over the last several years. And I was like sitting on the side of a field recently and I was like, it's a little like brand and performance. Like performance is like putting the ball in the goal, right? And in order to do that, you need a striker. But if you had a whole team of strikers, or if you just had the striker, I actually know that it's called a striker. That's how much I watch.
That's a good soccer mom.
That's just a good soccer mom, right? I don't know anything else about soccer. And I know you have to score a goal, but if you just did that, then you would not be successful as a team. So I think it's just sort of back to this whole mindset of marketing as being more holistic, and the fact that actually you need all pieces of it in order to be successful. So I in some ways, it's a little bit, yes, it's a big shift from where we've been recently. And it's a big shift because of the fact that the performance piece got so technical and is so technical and very specific. But in some ways, it's a little bit like back to fundamentals, right? Of making sure that marketing has to work to deliver value creation and to make sure that actually consumers and customers are buying more. So that's what I got.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that, this use of that time symbol is really intentional, that the math of it, because, the plus sign just signals kind of coexistence, that you need one and the other. But really what we've shown in our brand and demand report is that you actually need both to work together in an integrated fashion. So it's not just about having all the players on the field, They actually have to be working together. And that's really what's going to drive the winning results.
That's just such a good point, actually. I'm going to go back to being a soccer mom. Like when they don't play together, when they don't communicate with each other, then nobody scores
Nothing
goals.
gets done.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Well, one of the other things you tracked was that leading marketers were not necessarily the ones who spent the most, right? It was more important that the teams were integrated. And as you said, the silos are where the problem is. It's not just coexisting, it's working together. So what are some of the disconnects that you've seen in organizations where they end up with siloed teams, and why does that happen?
Yeah. So there's actually 3 kind of key silos that we often see. The first one is organizational, right? So a lot of times we have separate brand and performance teams reporting to different leaders with different KPIs. And that creates kind of competing priorities, fragmented strategies, and ultimately a breakdown. The second one is really the agency model and how your teams work with agencies, right? So a lot of times you might have a creative agency and a media agency and a performance agency. And these distinct teams are kind of reinforcing that siloed thinking. So again, making sure you're bringing these folks together in an integrated fashion. And finally, it's that measurement gap, right? So having different goals, different metrics on different timelines can really create that lack of a cohesive story. And so again, finding ways to integrate these things and making sure that you're bringing that integrated story to the C-suite is critical, because structure really is the strategy. Without that operational integration, the brand and performance aren't going to work effectively.
Right, exactly, yeah. And you can see how it's so easy to fall into that trap because you think we're doing different things, we need different expertise, and it's hard sometimes to like make sure that everybody knows what everyone else is working on. If you have a really big team, different agencies,
And you do need the different expertise.
You do.
And I think that's the piece of it, right? It's like the expertise is really important, but it all has to go in the same direction.
And all of it needs to be valued, right? Too. That's the other thing is sometimes there's like this, do organizations value performance more than brand? Or in some organizations, the creative people are the ones that are really valued. But actually, all those roles really matter. And it's really just making sure that each of them are valued for the role that they bring.
And then the CMO really needs to be playing the coach to really make sure that everybody knows this is the way we're going. This is what our goals are.
We're going to take this soccer analogy all
the
way.
It's working. It's working for me.
Can we move into theater, kids? All right.
So one of the things that happen inside an organization is there's that financial pressure to show each quarter that we're growing, right? And so often that is what causes the over-reliance on performance marketing because there's that quick win that you can show. How can marketers maybe navigate this pressure to like say we don't always have to be looking at quarters, but looking at the whole year to show how we're winning?
So tough. So tough.
It is tough.
Right? And partly, so I mean, there's a number of layers to this. We have found that the most successful marketers, most successful marketing organizations are able to do the short term and the long term at the same time, but in many different ways. We have found that the most successful CMOs are true organizational collaborators. So they are talking to their CFOs, they're talking to their CEOs, they're talking to their CIOs on a regular basis. And the reason they have those very strong relationships often is because they care about the numbers. They care about the outcomes, they care about the business results, and they see them as their business results, not as the organization's business results. Not like I, CMO, also own that quarterly result, not that somebody else owns that quarterly result. So that's on one hand, right? But on the other hand, at the same time, the most successful CMOs are able to build confidence with those people that they're spending time with at the senior level about the fact that there are long-term and short-term measures, and that actually not everything does need to be measured immediately. So it's sort of interesting in that, that those two data points that seem like they're actually in conflict with each other. And I think in the past, a lot of that has to do with, frankly, just the experience and the confidence and the leadership of the CMO to be able to navigate through some of those complicated things. What I love about the Multiplier Effect report is that it takes some of the subjectivity out of that, right? Is that we know now that actually, if you do performance marketing on its own versus if you put the two together, you've got 90% difference in your ROI. I mean, you can like put that in its simplest terms, right? Is if you do too much performance marketing, actually it makes performance more expensive in the longer term. So what I would encourage people to do is you're taking this now new and very compelling arguments that are able to say, actually, it's about immediate and sustained performance. Yeah, you got to have that immediate performance, really important, but also the sustained effect of brand. And that it mayn't be that long that you have to wait for it. Like, I think this whole idea of like the long and short of it, which obviously is how the whole conversation started. Is it really long or is it just sustained? Which frankly sounds much better than I've got to wait 3 years from now.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I think I would encourage people to start to bring these snippets of data, which are really easy for everyone to understand, and repeating them, and then trying to prove them out in their own organizations, right? So what is, if and I know Analytic Partner data said that, or maybe it was from BERA, I can't remember, that there was a half-life of around 3 months for brands.
Oh, that was
building
Analytic
data.
Partners, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, presumably different organizations that, depending on the purchase cycle that you're operating in, starting to prove that out. So having those sensible conversations, repeating those sensible conversations, owning the fact that you own the quarter, but also kind of looking and building confidence that those two things can happen at the same time.
That's great. Thank you. Kate, as you were saying, it's great that CMOs have that relationship with the CIO, the CFO, the CEO. Those relationships are so important that everyone has those same goals and that alignment happens. Marisa, why is it so important for that alignment to happen?
Yeah.
Within the organization to make it work?
Yeah. I mean, right now, a lot of times what you see, right, is you've got a brand team focusing on building brand awareness, and maybe your sales team is chasing leads, and you've got a growth team focused on revenue, but no one's talking about what all these things ladder up into, right? And how are we actually creating a shared vocabulary, a shared set of goals and ambitions that all of these different things kind of have to ladder up into. So using those relationships, leveraging that to create a common language, to create shared goals, and for everyone to understand their role in delivering on that shared ambition is really critical to success.
That is critical to success. You're right. One of the other things we talk about in the Multiplier Effect is why it's important to have creative platforms as opposed to just campaigns. And the idea behind the creative platform is really you have an idea that's big enough to encompass all the kinds of marketing you want to do and really get that brand across. What sort of organization really works for that to come up with a campaign, a creative platform as opposed to just campaigns?
Yeah. It's really important that this isn't about having a brand campaign and a performance campaign or a demand campaign, right? You shouldn't be creating independent campaigns. What the best brands are doing, and what we found in our study, is that what's really important is that you have a big enough creative concept that it can be applied across all parts of the funnel, right? So you should be creating really emotionally resonant ads that are focused, at the top of your funnel, but those also need to be supporting further down conversion and familiarity and creating more of that kind of mid-funnel relationship. At the same time, if you're creating lower funnel marketing that's really focused on conversion, it still needs to be on brand and have an emotional resonance. And so as you think about your creative platform, you have to really think holistically about the role it's going to play across that entire funnel. So again, having both all those key parties, whether it's from your agencies or from your own teams at the table, working off common briefs and really understanding how this creative idea can work across that entire funnel.
Right. Yeah. And the most successful brands really do have that. You know, when you're in that brand world, right? Like anything you see from them, you understand. I know immediately who's sending me this. It's not disconnected.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's
Absolutely.
that's where that strength of the brand comes from.
Yep.
So once you have your campaign, your creative platform, you need to figure out like where all of these pieces are going to go. And the media mix can get very complicated. But what we learned in the multiplier effect is that if you optimize your media mix, you get double duty. You actually get more out of it. Talk to me about what happens when you get the media part right and what needs to happen for that.
It really is the question of the 21st century marketer, right? It's like, where should I spend my money? I mean, at this point, I think, like media management and choosing which channels is an art and science in itself. And I think a lot of it just comes back to, in some ways, what Marisa just said, right? Is that we have to think about customers first and what their funnel or the journey is going to look like, and that each touch point that we see plays double duty. And higher in the funnel, it might be more brand and a little bit of demand or a little bit of performance, but like there should still be a call to action when you're in those kind of brand places. And then lower in the funnel, more call to action, but still definitely brand. And the media that you're using to deliver against that is a little bit, like all media types can be used for all kinds of things, right? So you can have direct response television advertising, and people still watch television. Or you can have brand driving search. And I think that, it's less frequent that you have brand driving search, but at the same time, and we all know that, actually having like a really strong brand is what's often driving search.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I think pulling ourselves away from, here's what traditional channels do, and more into what's the job I need to do at each point in the journey, and how do I live, and back to fundamentals again, how do I make sure I'm driving reach and frequency inside of those moments. I do think that, like at a brand level, you're more likely to use a channel that kind of is a one-to-many. It's the same message that is going to kind of many people. From a performance perspective, it may well be that you're like highly segmenting and very specific messages going to very specific people. But with connected television, you can do that just as much as you can in a social media environment. So I think it's just one of those things of like, let's think about objectives first. Let's go back to all those aligned things that we're trying to achieve. Let's make sure we're clear on kind of what parts of brand and demand we're going to do. And then I think sometimes it's really easy to think about the very kind of top of the funnel or the beginning of the journey and the end of the journey. And exactly as Marisa just said, it's like the middle actually is where most brand relationships are won and lost. And making sure that you're in all the places that you need to be where your customers are. That's in the end, like the Media 101 in 2025 is be where your customers are. And then think through what the role of that media needs to be in that messy middle. That's what Google says, right? Messy middle.
Messy middle. Mm-hmm. That's where every battle is won or lost, right? Is in that kind of familiarity phase. So, is that brand or is that demand? It's really right in the middle. And so obviously your creative platform needs to speak to the full funnel.
And the messy middle.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think bringing brand and performance back together in the digital age is so much more important, because all the places where you encounter ads in the digital space can be a video that's evoking emotion, but also a call to action all at the same time now,
right.
Which 25 years ago, you had a TV ad.
Right.
Do you remember when we were all going to buy Rachel's sweater on Friends? Do you remember that?
Yes.
The big thing, it was always like, we're
I'm
going
much too young for
to
that.
click on Rachel's sweater and everyone's going to buy it. Well, we actually are at that point now where you can do that. So you really do need to be doing everything all at once. Yeah.
Yep.
So if you're doing everything all at once, though, it does get very complicated about how you measure all of these things. And we really are at a point where it's critical what metrics and measurements we bring into the C-suite so that the finance teams know what we're doing. So Marisa, talk to me about like how you organize for measurement.
I think that might be me.
That is
you.
Kate,
That's okay. That's
tell me, how do you organize for measurement?
We look the same. So it's the same. So I think this one is really important. I spend a lot of time, it's not really doom scrolling on LinkedIn, is it? But it's sort of like scrolling. And I know the other day I saw a really nice 2x2. I'm a consultant that really demonstrated this very little relationship between click measures, vanity measures, and those longer term measures. So I think it's one of those things that we have to get really clear on what it is we're measuring and when we're measuring it. So I like to think about it as kind of leading and lagging measures that have to be tightly connected together. In the end, we're in the business of selling things. So the first thing that we have to be really clear on are what are our business outcomes? How many things do we need to sell? Then for me, so as you ladder up between that and then all the way down to how many clicks is good, like there needs to be all sorts of little points in between that actually is really clear on what good looks like, right? So at the top, you've got how much money do I need to make? And then underneath that, how many human beings or customers need to change their behavior in order that I'm going to deliver against that business result? And what also are the brand metrics, my awareness metrics, my consideration metrics that are actually going to help me deliver against that? And then what are the reach and frequency kinds of measures that I need to be able to do? And what are the attributes that I need to be driving in order that I can get those human beings to change their behavior and to change their attitudes? And then understanding that from an asset level, then what am I actually gonna, if I see something changing in a short period of time, actually how does that ladder up to all the others? So it's just sort of a top to bottom measurement system that allows people to say, I'm measuring this week. I can measure this on a weekly basis. I can measure my shift in attributes on a quarterly basis. Or maybe I may be able to measure some of my kind of customer acquisition stuff on a quarterly basis. My big brand metrics are probably going to be an annual thing. So just having a really clear view on like when and how I'm going to measure them. And super importantly, aligning those with people ahead of time. And this is where it comes all the way back to our aligned measurements, which is like, okay, CFO, this month you can expect to see this, this, and this. And that will help everybody get on the same page. So that's my proselytizing about measurement ladders.
Excellent. That's excellent. And of course, once we're measuring, then everybody thinks about like, okay, what money am I putting against all of this? So let's talk about budget. How should CMOs approach the budget with the C-suite to make sure that they're allocating everything correctly to do both?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, right, is I think we've found pretty consistently that many organizations are sort of in this 60-40 split brand and demand. So, the split itself isn't really what drives success, right? What we found is it's actually much more about how you're showing up and how you're integrating and whether you're actually creating the right metrics and organizational processes. But, putting at least 50% of your investment behind brand is shown to be best practice. And then, how much more, it becomes really a question of kind of where you are in your life cycle, what industry. If you're a well-known brand but struggling with relevance, you're going to need a little bit more in brand. If you're a brand new, startup, you're going to need to put a little bit more in performance. So, there's obviously variability across that, but it's not so much about exactly how much you're putting in brand versus demand or performance. It's really about what you're doing with it.
And at the same time, putting 100% in brand and 100% in performance.
Right? But also the key, though, is to make sure that everyone in the C-suite understands why you're allocating where you're allocating, right? That that we're doing the sustained and the like quick hits at the same time. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And both are working together.
Right.
And that investing in both actually makes both perform better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Another thing we talk about in the multiplier effect is that there is no one answer for any company. So you're going to have to do some experiments to figure out like what makes sense. So how should we be thinking about as an organization how we undertake these experiments and figure out what's working?
Yes. Yes, we should do that. Here's the thing though, CMOs like love experiments. CMOs who do best, I'm going to answer that question like a politician. CMOs, the most successful CMOs are, interestingly enough, the ones that say, gosh, it's really hard to keep up with the dynamic world out there. And at the same time, they say, the thing I love most about marketing is that it's dynamic and really fast-paced. So I know that's not answering your question, but I just sort of think it's one of those like really interesting sort of, CMOs don't have a problem with the experimental mindset. In fact, that's something that they love. I think what's super interesting, right, is that we know an experimental mindset is important, but we also know consistency is important, right? And I think that's something, there has been a number of studies over the course of the last year that really show consistency, again, along with brand, is actually what's going to help. It's another part of the multiplier effect, right? So how do you balance those things of making sure you're consistent, but also making sure that you're experimenting? And I think a couple parts to it. One comes a little bit back to the measurement piece of it, right? Being really, really clear on what is it you're trying to achieve with your experiments. You're probably not trying to experiment your way into strategy. But what you are probably trying to experiment your way into is, how do these mixes work? How, where is the line between kind of some of this brand and performance stuff? Which is going to be different across businesses. But again, but the discipline of experimentation is different than just sort of making things up, right? I'm a huge proponent. It's like, you have to make like the planning part of everything that we do as marketers is incredibly important. There was a moment in time where people were like, oh, we shouldn't have plans. Everything should be agile. I'm like, no, you need a plan so that you know what experiments that you need to undertake. So hypotheses testing, what are the hypotheses, and then what are the key measurements, and have I aligned those with the people who are actually funding my experiments? So I think it's just applying logic to our experiments, being clear on what success looks like, and then building an environment where it feels like it's okay that if those experiments don't work, because we know that what we're trying to achieve with them. And it all sounds sort of easy to say, I know. I think the hardest thing about experiments actually is being able to carve out the resources in a world where we have very little extra marketing expenditure, and the fact that the number of people in the marketing departments is going down and down and down. I think at this point in time, it's less about the experiments and more about, do we have the resources to deliver against them when every dollar and every human matters. So making sure that we're disciplined about it, I think, is important.
Which is why that having organizational buy-in is so important. Yeah.
And I'm always surprised at how many organizations still struggle to understand the idea that like a failure is a success if it's an experiment, right? And everything is about the learnings that you gain from that experiment. I think in a lot of sort of our B2B clients, like that level of discomfort with failure and the fear that my budget's going to get cut if I spent it on something that didn't succeed, that still exists in a lot of cultures. And so I do think that is still a mindset shift that is critical.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, to finish out, I guess I would ask, like, what would be your advice for organizations who are trying to create an integrated team after, say, having siloed team? Like, what would be the most useful thing that they could start doing to move towards integration?
Yeah. I mean, there's two like very tactical things that I always think of when we think about this. Like, one is just like actually seating people together, right? In like more of a pod kind of setup where they have a chance to actually cross-pollinate ideas, make sure that they actually, are building respect and rapport and all that good stuff. So I do think that kind of sitting teams together and integrating those in that kind of just physical space can be really valuable. And then, more integrated planning is always a key, part of it, is making sure that everyone's not running their planning independently, that you're actually all ultimately understanding what you're laddering up to, and that, you're kind of setting these plans across these different areas in tandem.
And like a big part of that, frankly, is common language, right? Like there's so much time can be spent like in definitions. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? And process and common language is a really important way for people to spend their time on the thinking and aligning around the outcomes as opposed to how the work's going to get done.
I mean, when we kicked off the Multiplier Effect report, the first thing we did was define what is brand marketing versus demand marketing or performance marketing.
And
right?
Didn't that take us like...
It took us a couple of meetings, I think. So,
that was much longer than we thought it was going to be.
But it is important, right? To make sure when we talk about these things that we actually are all speaking the same language.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, that's the biggest part of it. It's like speak the same language, have the same processes and tools, and spend your time on thinking.
And that's also important, like to bring your partners into that same comment. Like all your agents, you should also understand how, as an organization, you think about that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just it's a lot of coordinating across to get everyone on the same page, but worth it, because then you get the outsized results from the multiplier effect.
Yes, you do.
Absolutely.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you guys coming in and doing this with me.
Do we have a soccer thing to say at the end here?
A winning team is made up of all the players on the field working together.
And show up to practice? Wow.
Yes.
Show up to practice.
Show up to practice. Oh, yeah. And everyone listen to the coach.
That's right.
Or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. The Multiplier Effect can be found on WARC.com for download. And if you want to catch up to our other conversations with our other partners, do check out the WARC Podcast page to hear from Analytic Partners, BERA.ai and System1, and now Profit. So we've had all 4 partners. I'm Ann Marie Kerwin, America's editor for WARC. Be sure to subscribe and follow the WARC Podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for listening.